Good evening, everyone. It's all very well and good for David to say that social issues aren't urgent, but he's not gay and trying to adopt a child. You don't know that. And but as far as I'm aware, he's not gay and trying to adopt a child.
It's none of your business.
And it's fine. And it's fine for him to say, well, you know, this farmer had to pay an extra $5,000 to build his barn. Well, that's a shame, and he shouldn't have to pay the extra $5,000. But at least he still has a barn. If you can't adopt a child, or you can't get married to the person you love, you can't go to the state and pay them $5,000 and get the permission to do so. So there is a fundamental difference there, in that, okay, you're paying a bit of a tax, you're paying a bit of a fine to deal with the state economically. But when it comes to social issues, the government tends to ban, and there's no way past it. So that's essentially our rebuttal for those issues. But now, I want to come back to a more principled level. The United States has just finished negotiating a compromise between the Republicans and Democrats to raise the debt ceiling. It's a very serious economic issue with huge ramifications for the US. And many Americans are rightly very worried about the situation they find themselves in. But there's a reason why something as seemingly boring and economically complex as a debt ceiling enthralls the American public and gets debated amongst that public. And that's because Americans have an inbuilt distrust of government and a skepticism of politicians' promises. It's the same reason why Ron Paul can stand up and talk about legalizing heroin as a health and personal choice issue live on a Fox News Republican presidential debate live across the country and get a huge round of applause from a mostly conservative crowd in South Carolina, of all places. So the United States has an ingrained culture of freedom and liberty. It's a part of who they are, it's in their DNA, and it's also in their founding documents. The Declaration of Independence is one of the finest documents ever written. It contains the famous preamble, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now, putting aside your opinion on a creator, the key to that idea in that statement is that our rights as individuals are natural. They're inherent, and they're not something gifted to us by kings, dictators, or democratically elected governments. They're good. They're social freedoms, but they underlie the right to own and trade our own property, which is our economic freedom. The idea that what you create is your own, and that comes from those individual rights. New Zealand has no such document, no such statement of principles, and we have no history, really, of protecting individuals' freedoms, liberties and choices. The closest we come is a Bill of Rights created by a government in 1990, highlighting the very problem. So while the affirmative tonight are basically resting their case on the idea that economic freedom is more important, and if we follow that, we'll end up with social freedom in the end. We think that the idea of economic freedom is actually really just a subset of social freedom. Your freedom, David, to go and buy a beer isn't worth much if we've got prohibition or if they raise the drinking age. Your freedom to buy a house to live in with your family isn't worth much if the government doesn't recognise you and your partner as a family. If we ever want to make progress in New Zealand, we need to change minds, not just policies. We need to show that New Zealanders that freedom works, why that freedom works, and then show them the policies to get that freedom. Unfortunately, people, and particularly young people, have no interest in economics. They don't understand it, they don't care about it, and until they get older and get a higher paying job, they don't pay any tax, so it doesn't really affect them. They've also grown up in an era where government intervention is actually pretty light, an era of the internet and instant communication, where choice is everywhere. So, to show that New Zealanders that freedom works, and show them how it works, we need to talk about the issues and why their freedom is being limited by the government. And to do that, we need to show them areas where their freedom is being limited and where they can notice it. And at the moment in New Zealand, that is social. It's the drinking age, it's the alcohol availability, it's the drugs, it's the civil unions, it's censorship in TV, movies, games, internet, it's freedom of association of student associations, it's religious freedom, it's privacy, CCTV cameras and things like that. In addition to this approach, ACT has a natural advantage when advocating these types of policies. When ACT talks about cutting tax, the perception, though we know it's not true, is that we're only doing it because ACT Party members will benefit from those changes. People like Don Brash, Roger Douglas, John Banks, Richard Prebble, Ruth Richardson, have all deservedly done very well for themselves, but unfortunately it makes it harder for them to sell the message to the general public. As an aside, I'd like to think that these people also prove that politicians clearly are better in the boardroom. The best politicians get plum spots on boards, and these examples have served us on numerous boards, and there's no way politicians would keep appointing each other to the boards if they weren't doing a good job, right? Meanwhile, the rest of the politicians end up at the UN. By contrast, promoting socially liberal policies is unlikely to be interpreted in the same way. I can't imagine many journalists would be criticising Roger or Heather for their opposition to the banning of chronic in Parliament today on the basis that they only wanted it legal so they could indulge in some later tonight. In the end, ACT has a competitive advantage when marketing socially liberal ideas. We have an opportunity to appeal to a growing number of young people for whom social freedom seems obviously good, and where someone like Winston Peters, who harkens back to a previous era, is obviously backwards. So ACT can be a progressive, forward-looking party, a party of the future, a party for young people and what they want to see in the world, and I hope everyone here will help us do that. Thank you.